Hope you had a good weekend. This is a daily report for Monday, April 4th here in Korea. I'm Min San-hee. We're starting the work week with another drop in COVID-19 tallies, boosting hopes for a prompt transition into a new normal. I have Kwon So standing by. So just start us off then.
Sunny, we can only hope for this downward trend to persist. But from what we've been seeing so far, cases do seem to be decreasing significantly, with a little over 127,000 infections tallied as of 12 a.m. this Monday, which is the lowest figure in 41 days. And with that, it also marks a decrease in the average number of daily cases in the past 7 days, standing at around 285,000. And also this Monday's caseload is roughly 60,000 fewer cases than exactly a week ago. Now, slightly under 50% of infections have been reported in the capital region, with Gyeonggi-do province falling down to below 37,000. Seoul in the 20,000s, and as you can see, many places across the nation have now declined to the 4-digit level. However, Korea's accumulated caseload now has surpassed the 14 million mark, and the death toll stands at 17,453, with 218 additional deaths reported in the past day. And let's move over to the number of patients that remain in severe or critical condition. This number has been dropping slightly in recent days after hitting above 1,300 last week, now at 1,108 as of 12 a.m. this Monday. Now, not many vaccinations have been administered over the weekend, as you can see here, but we've got close to 44.5 million of the nation's population that's considered fully vaccinated. And we also have 32.8 million people who have received an additional or booster shot. Let's take a look at the global figures. As you can see, there's been less than 1 million new COVID-19 cases reported in the span of 24 hours as of noon Korea time, which could also be due to the weekend factor, though, with 1,818 new deaths reported in the past day. And those are the general updates I have for now, but I'll see you back in a bit. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for those tallies. Now, for more domestic coverage of the COVID-19 situation, I have Choi Min-jung here in the studio with me. Min-jung, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Sunny.
Right, so Korea's COVID-19 tallies are prompting quite a bit of hope, Min-jung, about the future course of the pandemic here in the country.
That's right, Sunny. Many signs are pointing to a fall in the number of severe cases as well as deaths in the coming days. Senior health official Son Young-ne said in a radio interview on Monday that the tallies will start to drop after reaching a peak sometime this week or next week. Health authorities have been saying that the number of severe cases and deaths will continue to rise for the time being, 2 to 3 weeks after the Omicron peak. They had forecast a peak of 1,800 patients in critical condition, but Son said it is unlikely to reach that high at this point. He also expressed optimism that fatalities will also go on a downward trend soon. And regarding daily cases, we did see a big drop in the number of new infections, like Swa mentioned earlier, partly because of the weekend and when fewer people get tested. But we are also seeing a drop in the country's 7-day daily average, which fell into the 200,000s for the first time in 3 weeks.
Right, Min-jung, and against that backdrop, we have revised restrictions taking effect as of this Monday. Remind us about them.
Right, relaxed social distancing measures will be in place starting today for 2 weeks. Up to 10 people will be allowed to gather for social events, regardless of vaccination status. And businesses can open until midnight, and these include restaurants, cafes, singing rooms, public baths, as well as clubs and bars. Movies and shows at theaters and concert halls may begin any time before midnight, but performances must end before 2 a.m. Meanwhile, restrictions for large events and rallies remain the same, capped at 299 people, regardless of vaccination status. Events with over 300 spectators can be held, but only through special approval by the government. And rules remain the same for places of worship as well, with a 70% capacity limit for in-person congregations. On the medical front, the country's healthcare system is now treating COVID-19 like any other common disease. Starting Monday, local clinics and hospitals can submit their applications to provide in-person treatment for COVID patients. Patients can book an appointment and visit clinics and hospitals for treatment, even if they're under self-isolation. And as of Friday, there are over 570 medical centers nationwide that provide in-person COVID treatment. Starting next week, those wishing to get tested for COVID-19 can only get rapid antigen tests from clinics and hospitals, as screening centers will no longer provide them. However, PCR tests will continue to be available at screening centers, but only for seniors and those who came into close contact with an infected person.
Minjung, authorities have spoken about the possibility of rolling back all remaining restrictions with the exception of indoor face mask mandates if tallies hold steady. What has been the response to that?
Well, there has been a mixture of hopes and concerns, as some pundits say the move is premature and risky, while others say the time has come when people should be allowed to venture around outside without a mask. Other countries that have passed the Omicron peak, like the US and the UK, have already lifted outdoor mask mandates. And some health experts here are calling on the government to make a similar move, given the relatively low rate of outdoor transmissions compared to indoor settings. But many are strongly advising people to wear a mask in crowded areas, especially for older people or those in the high-risk category. And they also recommend that indoor mask mandates should remain in place for now. And I believe our panel of experts will be commenting on this later on in the show, so we'll be listening to what they have to say.
Right, in the second half of the show, Minjung. Meanwhile, so I hear we're looking at a boost in air travel in the near future here.
Right, Sunny. This as the government is discussing a gradual increase of international flights amid the improving COVID-19 situation. According to the country's transport ministry on Sunday, it's planning to raise flight operations to up to 50% of the level back in 2020 and submit its plan to the Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency later this week. Now, while in 2019, before the pandemic, an average of 4,770 flights were scheduled a week, in March this year, just 406 flights operated in the entire month. The Transport Ministry plans to expand those by 100 each month, and by the peak holiday season in July or August by 300 a month. However, it needs further consultations with health authorities, as they have lately had a bigger say in setting flight operation rules. But last week, Health Minister Han Duck-soo did hint there will be hopes on the horizon for the travel industry.
We're continuing to adjust our prevention guidelines to more closely resemble pre-pandemic norms when it comes to foreign arrivals. We're also holding many discussions with relevant government agencies to normalize international travel by increasing the number of flights and easing passenger boarding restrictions.
And in fact, sales of travel packages and tickets have been shooting up a lot recently. According to Interpark Tour, an online flight booking agency, it saw a jump by over 320% of flights to the Pacific islands of Guam and Saipan, followed by a surge of over 280 and 260% to the Americas and Europe, respectively. And that's comparing figures from February 11th to the 22nd. With March 11th to the 22nd, meaning before and after the government had announced some loosening of quarantine restrictions regarding people traveling.
We had expected overseas travel to recover more slowly in light of the growing number of infections, but bookings have risen much faster than expected, following the government's decision to scrap quarantine rules.
Right, but so some air routes, I understand, though, are being closed.
Yes, Sunny. South Korea's flagship carrier Korean Air said on Monday it decided to suspend flights from Incheon to Hong Kong, and that as recently 3 COVID-19 patients were confirmed on planes on that route. And also a number of routes to Chinese cities have been cancelled, remain cancelled. That goes for Korean Air as well as Asiana Airlines.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Minjung, as border controls are being largely eased, there is talk about a new variant that's also raising quite a bit of concern.
That's right, Sunny. Authorities are closely watching a new strain of COVID-19 called the XE variant. According to the WHO, XE is a hybrid of the Omicron and stealth Omicron variants, and it appears to be 10% more transmissible than the highly contagious stealth Omicron. XE was first detected in the UK in mid-January, and around 600 cases have been confirmed since then. Taiwan and Thailand also identified their first cases of the new variant, and Israel has also reported suspected cases of XE. No cases have been reported in South Korea as of now, but experts are saying that the lifting of outdoor mask mandates should be reconsidered if a new variant emerges. We are expecting further updates as the WHO and global health experts are now working to evaluate the risks associated with the new variant.
And those evaluations are actually underway on the transmissibility of 3 hybrid viruses. So not only the XE, but also XD and XF. And the latter 2 having derived from a combination of the Omicron and Delta variant. Now, the UK Health Security Agency, meanwhile, which has been studying the XE mutation, said it's too soon to know if it's more contagious than other strains, given the fact that only a small fraction of the tens of thousands of COVID-19 cases that have been reported on a daily basis has yet been identified.
I see. So let's end with the latest events in the Chinese city of Shanghai, where millions, I understand, remain under lockdown.
Right. It's like Wuhan 2 years ago. China's most populous city has evolved as the epicenter of the country. Now, on Sunday, Shanghai has reported 7,788 daily locally transmitted asymptomatic cases, up from 6,501 the day before. Symptomatic cases rose to 438 from 260. China in total reported more than 13,000 on the same day, the most since the peak of the first wave 2 years ago. Shanghai has ordered its 26 million residents to go through 2 more rounds of COVID-19 tests as authorities are trying to tackle the continuous surge in infections with China's zero-COVID strategy. The lockdown of the financial hub had been extended to the entire city last week, leading to massive disruptions in daily lives and businesses. U.S. automaker Tesla, meanwhile, reportedly failed to restart operations at its Shanghai factory on Monday following its halt more than a week ago, making it the longest suspension since having opened its assembly lines in 2019. And due to this dire situation, healthcare workers from other places in the country are flocking down to Shanghai to help, not only for medical support, but also to support citizens with daily necessities. And there's also some concerns regarding the separation of some families due to this outbreak recently, as for instance, babies that have been infected with COVID-19 are separated from their parents, even if their parents are infected as well. So that's another situation where it's difficult to take care of all these infected babies as well currently.
Right, I see. All right, so as always, thank you very much for the coverage. See you on Tuesday. And Minjung, thank you very much for your input.
Thank you.
We start our new segment on this Monday afternoon on the local political front. President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's cabinet is taking shape, and the first name on that roster is Han Duck-soo as Prime Minister. Our Lee Kyung-eun reports.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has picked former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo to serve as the first PM under his new government. Yoon said Han is the right person for the economy and national security, 2 of the top priorities for Yoon's government.
경제와 안보가 하나가 된 경제 안보 시대를 철저히 대비해 나가야 합니다. 한덕수 총리 후보자는 민관을 아우르는 풍부한 경험을 바탕으로 내각을 총괄하고 조정하면서 국정과제를 수행해 나갈 적임자라고 생각합니다.
The 72-year-old has previously served as finance minister, prime minister, and ambassador to the U.S., playing a key role in negotiating the free trade agreement with Washington. And he's worked for both liberal and conservative governments, perhaps making him an even better pick for Yoon, who's been emphasizing unity. Also, such far-reaching experience is deemed critical for the new government's plan of enhancing the role of prime minister, which currently is largely administrative in South Korea.
The president-elect's plan is to shift excessive presidential rights to the cabinet so that ministers have greater authority in making decisions and taking responsibility for them. And I agree with that.
Han outlined 4 primary tasks: strengthen security, fiscal soundness, surplus in international balance of payments, and increase national productivity. And he said communication is key to achieving those goals.
One of the key factors deciding whether policies succeed will be bipartisan cooperation and integration.
That's especially true as the soon-to-be main opposition Liberal Democratic Party holds a majority in the National Assembly, so their cooperation will be pivotal for Yoon in pushing through policies or changes to the law. Such cooperation, in fact, will be needed in just a few weeks, which will see the parliamentary hearing for Yoon's nomination. Han will be preparing for the hearing and discussing the rest of the cabinet picks, which are expected to be finalized by next week. Yoon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, a delegation representing the incoming Yoon administration is currently in the U.S. to kickstart collaboration on issues of bilateral interest. Our Yoon Jung-min has more.
President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's delegation to the U.S. arrived in Washington on Sunday for discussions on the bilateral alliance and North Korea issues with the Biden administration officials, U.S. politicians, and experts at think tanks. Yoon's delegation includes 7 experts led by Representative Park Jin of the People Power Party. They are set to deliver Yoon's stance on the bilateral relationship to the Biden administration, as well as discuss North Korea issues at a time when tensions are rising on the Korean Peninsula.
The security situation on the Korean Peninsula is severe. We will discuss in depth what we can do for the U.S. security commitments and the comprehensive strategic alliance of South Korea and the U.S.
He said the new government will stick to principles regarding North Korea policies and that they are willing to discuss economic cooperation if Pyongyang takes steps towards denuclearization. He also said the new Yoon administration agrees with the Biden administration's bottom-up approach on North Korea, stressing the need for realistic and verifiable roadmaps regarding nuclear issues. The delegation is set to deliver President-elect Yoon's letter to President Biden and discuss their first summit. It's likely that they will hold a summit in Seoul after Biden visits Japan next month for a Quad summit. For their first stop of their week-long trip, the delegation visited the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C. Experts say the delegation's visit should not just be a meet and greet, but instead should include in-depth discussions on key issues.
The delegation to the United States should touch upon very detailed agenda rather than talking generally about the issues like North Korea alliance, things like that. Because the delegation consists of many experts.
According to a survey of 1,000 people by the Federation of the Korean Industries on Monday, almost 9 out of 10 people in South Korea prioritize the U.S. for cooperation on diplomacy and national security. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
In Eastern Europe, Russia's assault against Ukraine continues with strategic focus on essential facilities amid shocking revelations of civilian executions. Our Kim Hyo-sun explains.
Russia says it has struck what it calls critical infrastructure near Ukraine's southern port city of Odesa. The attacks on Sunday caused an oil facility in the region, the main base for Ukraine's navy, to go up in flames.
This is not a good morning for Odesa. We woke up to powerful explosions near our home. The impact was huge. There is still smoke billowing. The children were in a panic. The windows were blown in. It was terrifying.
Saying oil facilities have been a focus of their attacks, Moscow's defense ministry explained that it had struck 4 oil facilities across the country. While no casualties were reported, a local prosecutor said the bodies of 410 civilians have been recovered near the country's capital after the withdrawal of Russian forces. It added forensic experts are on the ground to examine the bodies and gather information. Against such a backdrop, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing Russia of genocide. In related news, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken stressed that those responsible for war crimes must be held accountable, referring to Russia's war against Ukraine. He also noted the Biden administration believes Russian forces have committed war crimes and is helping with evidence collection. The head of the UN also expressed shock over the situation, calling for an independent investigation. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
On a light note now, technology is indeed transforming the entertainment industry. In fact, it's led to the emergence of virtual K-pop artists with a huge fan base in metaverse. Our Song Yoo-jin met up with one of them.
안녕하세요, 여러분. 세계로 우주로 뻗어나가고 싶은 버추얼 아티스트 아포키입니다.
She may look like a character from a Disney movie, but she's actually a virtual K-pop artist. APOKI introduced herself to the public through her YouTube channel 3 years ago and started gaining recognition after her K-pop cover song and dance videos went viral. Last year, she realized her dream of becoming a singer, releasing her debut single, Get It Out. Over the course of a year, she released 3 albums and now has nearly 300,000 YouTube subscribers and over 3 million TikTok followers. To connect with her fans and audience worldwide, APOKI made her first radio appearance on Arirang's very own Super K-pop show on Wednesday. During the hour-long segment, APOKI talked about the journey leading up to her debut, performed one of her songs, and answered questions from listeners. After the show, I had the chance to speak with APOKI myself and asked her experience on Arirang Radio.
네, 제가 저의 인사말로 세계로 우주로 뻗어나가고 싶다고 말씀을 드렸는데요. 아리랑이 이제 전 세계에 송출되는 프로그램이잖아요. 그래서 일단 세계로 나가는 한 걸음을 열어주셔서 제가 너무너무 감사드리고 정말 즐거운 경험이었습니다.
The virtual K-pop artist says she has and is hoping for more exciting plans to come.
지금 신곡 준비를 하고 있거든요. 그래서 여러분들이 불러주시면은 노래도 광고도 모델도 열심히 하고 싶으니까 많이 찾아주셨으면 좋겠고 또 제가 방금 말씀드린 곧 나올 앨범 많이 사랑해 주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
Industry insiders predict virtual artists like APOKI will help K-pop captivate more fans, especially among the younger generation.
I mean, I'm also a music writer myself, and it's something that I've looked into a lot. I think yes, because a lot of the new audience, I'm talking about the generation of kids who are teenagers, I know they're really involved in virtual worlds and things like that. So I think for them, it's natural to be in connection with a virtual artist.
Virtual artists are on their way to opening new trends and culture in the K-pop industry. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. The Sacramento police are asking for the public's help in finding the gunman who shot and killed 6 people while injuring 10 others in downtown Sacramento. According to police reports, a large crowd was gathered in the area when gunfire erupted at around 2 a.m., but was unclear whether the crowd was connected to any particular venue or event. However, the crime scene was within a few blocks of several notable landmarks, including the California State Capitol and the City Hall. The death toll marks the worst mass shooting in modern Sacramento history, while also matching the highest figure for all of the United States this year. At least 14 people are dead, including 7 children, after days of heavy rainfall triggered massive flooding and landslides in Rio de Janeiro. The heavy rain began Thursday, with the volume of rain registered in the last 48 hours marking the highest on record in the area. Authorities are also in search of more than 10 people missing. Rio de Janeiro has especially been hit hard by inclement weather over the past few weeks, as landslides and flooding killed some 240 people in roughly 1 month in the northern Petropolis region. Despite the government imposing a curfew, protesters took to the streets of Sri Lanka's capital on Sunday to demonstrate against an unprecedented economic crisis.
There is no gas, there is no petrol, there is nothing to eat, there is no medicine. What can we do? If this continues, we will have to jump into the sea.
On Friday, the country's president declared a state of emergency as the island nation grapples with rising prices, shortages of essentials, and rolling power cuts. Critics say the roots of the crisis lie in economic mismanagement by successive governments that amassed huge budget shortfalls and a current account deficit. The Taliban supreme leader on Sunday issued a ban on the cultivation of narcotics in Afghanistan, the world's biggest opium producer. The announcement came during a press conference held by the Ministry of Interior, with all violators to see their crops destroyed immediately and be dealt with according to Sharia law. The ban also includes production, use, or transportation of other narcotics. The Taliban had banned poppy cultivation during their previous period in power as they sought international legitimacy, but faced backlash and later changed stance. Afghanistan's opium production was estimated to be worth $1.4 billion at its height in 2017. 이 승재, Arirang News.
Starting April 1st, that was last Friday here in Korea, the ban on single-use plastics has been brought back, and its return at this particular point during the pandemic is triggering quite a bit of controversy nationwide. To take a look.
On April 1st, a nationwide ban on single-use plastics came into force at restaurants and cafes all across Korea. This new rule has spelled an end to the use of plastic cups, disposable plates, and plastic cutlery, among other items.
코로나로 일회용품 사용이 늘어나 폐기물이 급증했고 다용품 사용과 코로나 확산 간의 영향은 불명확하다는 전문가 의견이 있었고 현재 식당에서도 다용품을 사용함을 고려해서 규제를 재개하게 됐습니다.
Korea's ban on single-use plastics actually dates back to 2018. But the rule was temporarily lifted for cafes and restaurants in February of 2020 due to the COVID-19 outbreak. The fear of infection and the growing demand for delivery services triggered a 25% on-year surge in paper waste and a 19% rise in plastic waste in the year 2020. With the ban on single-use products now having been reinstated, how then are coffee shops handling reusable cups and mugs that have been returned by their customers? This coffee chain branch has made the switch to reusable cups in compliance to the new government rules and as part of the company's green initiative. The store charges customers a deposit for their reusable cups, which is paid back when they return the used cups to this machine. The used cups that have been collected are then sent elsewhere to be cleaned thoroughly.
기존에 제공되던 일회용 컵 대신에 1,000원의 보증금이 부과되는 다회용 컵이 제공이 되고요. 에코 매장에 설치된 반납기에 가져오시면 이 컵을 반납하시고 보증금을 환급 받으실 수 있습니다. 고압으로 세척을 하고 그리고 살균, 소독, 건조를 하고 마지막으로 이제 최종적으로 납품이 되기 전에 미생물 검사라는 단계를 거쳐서 이 컵에 어떤 품질의 이슈가 없는지 굉장히 엄격하게 관리를 한 컵을 납품받고 있습니다.
However, some pundits say that the ban on single-use plastics could wait a little longer, in light of financial struggles being faced by small business owners amid the pandemic.
손님들과 실랑이가 일어나고 자영업 사장님들이 더 힘들어지는 정책을 왜 꼭 지금이어야 하는가 의문입니다. 코로나19가 잠잠해질 때까지는 일회용 컵 규제를 유예하는 것이 좋다고 생각합니다.
Despite concerns over global warming being voiced by environmental activists, many small business owners have something much more personal and closer to home to worry about: their livelihoods and their very survival.
사실 이제 이 제도는 1월에 이미 예고된 상황이었고 약 3개월간의 유예 기간을 두었습니다. 근데 이제 현재 코로나19가 언제 누그러질지도 모르는 상황에서 계속 유예 기간을 둔다면 매장 내 일회용품 사용 금지가 언제 재개될지도 모르는 상황이 될 것 같습니다. 지금과 같이 지금 폐기물 발생량이 증가되는 상황에서는 좀 향후 사회적인 문제가 될 거라고 보여집니다.
일회용 컵 사용을 제한하는 건 환경 보호적 측면에서 매우 바람직하다 이렇게 볼 수가 있겠습니다. 그렇지만 아직 자영업자분들께서 그 어려움이 많고 준비가 완전히 안 되셨기 때문에 이게 이제 자영업자분들이 준비가 될 때까지 유예 기간을 두어서 융통성 있게 운영하는 것이 바람직하다 이렇게 볼 수가 있겠습니다.
Even ordinary citizens appear to be divided over the ban on single-use plastics.
그냥 언제든 뭐 컵을 사용하고 버릴 수 있고 이렇게 하니까 불편함은 많이 해소되는 점에서 일회용 컵을 사용하는 것 같아요.
쓰레기도 많아지고 환경 보호를 위해서 안 쓰는 게 맞다고 생각합니다.
In the end, the government maintained its ban on single-use plastics, but removed provisions for harsh enforcement and fines, allowing more room for business owners to gradually ease into the new rules at their own pace.
일회용품을 사용하기 원하는 손님과 그리고 이제 매장 직원분들 간의 갈등 그리고 그로 인해서 일회용품을 사용했을 경우에 발생할 수 있는 과태료에 대한 부담이 지금까지 많으셨습니다. 그래서 저희가 코로나 상황이라는 특수한 상황을 고려해서 규제는 4월 1일부터 시행은 하되 과태료 부과는 당분간 유예하는 것으로 결정했습니다.
The reinstatement of the single-use plastic ban had been a long time in the making, with the government hinting at its revival as far back as June and November of last year. Experts say that we should use the time we've been given to find a compromise solution that minimizes the negative impact on businesses while still allowing us to reach our environmental goals.
페널티 방식보다는 인센티브 방식으로 하면 좋겠습니다. 예를 들면 텀블러를 가지고 오면 커피값을 깎아준다든가 이러한 방식이 적당하지 무조건 300원을 더 추가를 해가지고 반환하면 300원을 돌려주겠다. 이러한 방식은 적절치 않은 것 같고요. 빨대를 꽂지 않아도 되는 식으로 페트병을 디자인을 한다든가 이런 식으로 해서 소비자가 좀 편리하게 환경 친화적 행동을 할 수 있게 요 생산이나 개발 단계에서의 연구도 활발하게 이루어져야 된다. 이렇게 생각을 합니다.
Debate over the use of disposable plastics is raging on as our society continues to balance the needs of small business owners with our vision of a zero-carbon future.
Starting today, Korea has in place what many hope will be the last set of social restrictions over the next 2 weeks before the country's transition into an endemic phase of this pandemic. For more on these prospects, I have Professor David Kwak from Suncheon University. Professor Kwak, welcome back.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
I also have Professor Marcel Carlin at the Oregon Health and Science University live on the line. Professor Carlin, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Likewise, nice to see you, Sunny.
Right, Professor Kwak, under the new guidelines here in the country, a total of 10 people can gather for social purposes, while drinking, dining and other leisure venues can cater to patrons until midnight. Are these measures in line with our current strategy against COVID-19, do you think?
Well, yes, I would think so. I think the government is quite eager to put us back to the normal lives, or at least as close to it before that we used to have before the pandemic. But I don't think these minor changes, such as changing the cap on the numbers of people gathering from 6 to 8, and also extending a little bit of the restaurant venues of their curfew hours from, let's say, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m., is not going to give too much of an impact in the sense that we're already heading downwards in the confirmatory cases. The only regret that I have about this is that I personally feel that all this loosening of social distancing guidelines has begun a little prematurely. So it created these massive confirmatory cases in which we another change or extension of certain changes is not going to really make that much of a change in its transmission. So the fashion of decline that we're currently seeing in the graph is not going to change that much, because I believe people nationwide are already feeling they're on their own in regards to taking care of or protection against COVID-19. So when they're not really following closely of their social distancing guidelines already, minor changes made at this point is really not going to impact that much either.
I see. Professor Kwok, as my colleague Min Jung mentioned earlier, if COVID-19 tallies here in the country remain within capacity, authorities have spoken about the possibility of rolling back all remaining restrictions with the exception of indoor face mask mandates. What, in your view, are the prospects perhaps of such a scenario?
Well, once again, I personally feel that it shows us how eager the government is to put us back to the title of being on the normal level of life. Medically speaking, though, as a medical professional, I need to stay in the most conservative way in regards to medical protection of people against certain viral sources. What's the haste? I mean, my question is, why haste it so much that while certain groups of professionals are coming up with concerns over such tactics? I agree that we are currently being managed because we are having stabilization in severe case numbers, and also even though it has risen to a great amount, the death rate still has not gone anything beyond that was expected. So I do agree with the stabilization of management, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're completely okay to just all of a sudden let loose of everything and just go back to complete normal life, because even still, there is that level of uncertainty in the future that we have no idea of what can happen with this particular virus. Even though there is said to be a medicine that can prevent a certain level of death, it's not still a curative medicine. It can only work within a certain period of time after the show up of symptoms. And we have no level of protocols we can only follow through to completely cure these diseases. So even though I'm very happy that the government foresees that we're going to see a even greater stabilization and even greater management of this disease, as a medical personnel, I'm not able to completely comply or agree with the government's current idea of letting loose all our guards just yet.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Curlin, over in the US, the Omicron subvariant BA2 appears to be dominating COVID-19 infections there, amid speculation that it may fuel a fresh resurgence. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's right, Sunny. We're seeing that the BA2 variant, which is a sort of strain, it's one type of Omicron, is now rapidly replacing BA1 as the dominant cause of all new infections. It's not entirely unexpected. I do think that it will probably lead to a small rebound in a number of cases. Already in the United States, we have, of course, we're all, globally speaking, in the United States as well, we're all at the tail end of this large surge that was the Omicron wave, which was largely BA1. And now we're sort of waiting to see what happens next. If you look at the graph over time of the surges that we've all experienced, you notice that peaks have come roughly 3 or 4 months apart. And so we've just emerged from one, and it seems likely that we could be due for maybe another smaller peak in a couple of months, maybe in early summer. I say smaller because BA2 is also, if you've had BA1 or if you've been vaccinated, you still have immunity against BA2 that is protective. And so while BA2 is surging in some sense, it's accounting for a large proportion of the number of cases, it's having to find new people to infect who have already either had BA1 or they've been fully vaccinated. So it's a bit harder territory for BA2. So I do believe that while we will have a small peak due to BA2, it won't be quite as bad as the Omicron wave that we've seen in the past.
Right, I see. And perhaps against that backdrop of concerns, Professor Kurlin, the FDA and CDC cleared the path for second booster doses to those aged 50 and above without consulting their independent vaccine panels. How do you explain this break from norm, so to speak?
Right. So for your listeners, most probably know that in the United States, the FDA approves something, and a drug for use, and then the CDC offers recommendations. So the FDA says you can, and the CDC says you should. And as you point out, normally there's an advisory panel, an independent advisory panel to each of those two bodies that helps make that decision for them. And in this case, that didn't happen. We had approval of both the FDA and the CDC for a second booster, so a fourth dose, in some individuals that came very, very rapidly. It's unusual. I would say this, on the one hand, you have a lot of data showing, remember, this is not a new drug anymore. We have 214 million people in the United States who are fully vaccinated. Most of them got an mRNA vaccine of some kind. And around the world, many more millions of people. So the drug is a known one. Secondly, we have data from the Israeli trial in which they really looked at safety signal of a fourth dose, a second boost. And so I think there was a lot of information already about the risks. There were no new risks that had emerged. This had been really discussed in committees previously. And on the other hand, we have what you were pointing out, which is this kind of concerning rise in the number of BA2 cases. So I believe that these regulatory bodies made a decision that more expeditious approval was really beneficial to prevent any possible surge among vulnerable people, rather than delaying for committee meetings without a lot of new information that would provide a basis for changing the decision.
Right, and talking about vulnerable people, Professor Kwok, second booster doses here in the country are being offered to those at high risk, but the uptake appears to be slow. How do you explain this reality, and what do you propose perhaps to boost the uptake of the fourth dose in the country?
Right, so I think in that regard, we need to have a look at what really happened realistically in a clinical world. The lack of compliance by the appropriate targeted group of people who were allowed to receive the fourth shot, meaning the second booster shot, actually got infected. So during their quarantine, they were not able to actually get those second boosters. Those people, currently, the second boosters are allowed to people who are being contained in the nursing homes or are admitted in hospitals of those who are very elderly of their ages. But as we have seen in the past couple of weeks or so, with the massive numbers of infection daily, those people contained also in the nursing homes did go through cluster infections, and many of them were infected in the past couple of weeks, in disabling them from actually receiving the shots. So I don't think it's mainly the compliance issue that we're dealing with the lack of injections with the second booster, but it's more of a physical issues that people weren't physically able to receive them. And I'm hoping in the near future that'll catch up so that people who need the second shot of the booster will start to get it. But I'm also hoping that it won't just be allowed to those people who are contained in hospitals. I'm hoping that it'll be allowed to anybody above 50, just like in the US, so that people who feels that they need to receive the second booster to have sort of the boosted immunity against COVID-19 can choose to do so. So I think it's more of the matter of physical hindrance that actually blocked them from receiving the second shot.
Right. And Professor Kurlin, staying with second booster shots, perhaps I should have asked you this earlier, but where do you stand on the debate over their necessity?
Well, if we go back to the information we have, the Israeli study, they took about 500,000 people, a bit more, and gave some of them the second booster and some did not get it. About 58% got the second booster. And after a very relatively short period of time, I think it was 40 days or something like that, they saw a substantial drop in mortality in those who got the second shot, the second booster. I think they had about 92 deaths in the group that got the booster compared with 232 who did not get the booster. So that's a really substantial difference in a short amount of time. And I think the reason we saw such a strong signal there was because they really chose the group that's most at risk for severe infection and complications and death. They took people, over 65. And I think that that's the group where that should really consider strongly getting a booster. So I think if you're in the older age bracket, if you are a vulnerable person in terms of immunocompromise or comorbidities like diabetes, like metabolic syndrome, hypertension, you might want to consider getting a second booster.
Right. And Professor Curlin, as my colleague mentioned earlier, the WHO has issued a warning against a new mutant, the XE variant of Omicron. Could you tell us a bit about it?
Of course, yeah. This is one of these features of the reality of viral diseases. Viruses change over time, particularly if they're infecting a large number of people. And obviously, Omicron or COVID itself is the poster child for this. So we have sort of 3 subspecies of Omicron that were discussed a bit earlier in your segment that are recombinant viruses. What does that mean? It means that there are 2 viruses, let's take, for example, Delta and Omicron, that have mixed so that you have a new virus that has features of each. It's a sort of a shortcut for the virus to acquire new variations and configurations. It can only happen in nature if you have a person who's infected with both viruses at the same time. And what happens is during the viral replication, there's some mistakes made and you get a hybrid virus that's made of the 2. So XE is made up of BA1 and BA2. It's a lot of it is BA2, including the spike protein. The thing that's notable about this XE variant is that it's perhaps even a bit more transmissible than BA2. BA2 had a substantial transmission advantage over BA1 of about maybe 30%, and XE is another 10% more transmissible on top of that. So that may become significant if a sufficient number of people become infected. That advantage may be significant.
Right, I see. And moving forward, Professor Kwok, so I suppose the chance of witnessing more variants in the future is very, very high then. Having said that, what are the chances then of perhaps coming across a variant that proves to disrupt once again our sense of normality?
Well, I guess it'll depend also on the time length of immunity we would last to have. From the injections, it's a rough estimate, but we have seemed to have had about 3 months or so of its effectiveness lasting, but also with natural immunity, since a lot of the population have now gotten an infection, seems to last a little longer than that. They're currently speculating possibly from 6 months to maybe even in the span of a year that the immunity against COVID-19 would last. But also, if the time overlaps when a new, stronger variant, meaning possibly being more transmissible, at the time where the immunity level among population starts to become very low, there is a chance that that'll also create another resurgence of COVID-19 among the population. And I'm hoping dearly that'll be a strain which is very, very weak in the sense that it won't create any severe cases or even death for the matter. But also, if you look in the past in the history, viruses that mutate tended to become weaker and faster. If you think of it this way, a virus which kills a person immediately will not be able to transmit to another person because the host dies. But a virus quick enough to be transmitted to another person while not completely killing the host yet becomes more transmissible and larger in its amount and numbers. So in that regard, if it repeats itself of mutations in such regard, it is more probable, and I'm hoping, that the variants that are to be happening in the future would likely be more fast in its transmission, but less harmful. So I'm hoping for that direction.
And I'm hoping for that as well, Professor Kwok. Also, we've touched upon the growing prevalence of long COVID here in the country amid mounting caseloads in recent weeks. Professor Kwok, what more can you tell us about these post-infection symptoms from your own experience within the medical arena?
Well, I can actually tell you two different things. I've seen some patients actually come in with long-lasting effects from prior infection, such as brain fog, such as fatigue. Some people actually claim they were having breathlessness, very mildly, but still. But also some people had chest pains and whatnot that we had to give examinations for. I can also attest to some of those symptoms myself, as I have gone through infection a couple of weeks ago. Currently, I'm having a little nasal congestion still, even when I'm not having the infection itself. I'm also having a little bit of fatigue, which definitely makes a difference for daily activities that I normally have. I am seeing that quite more commonly these days in my clinics as well. So I guess in a medical aspect, those are some of the symptoms and syndromes that we would have to deal with, at least for the time in the future.
Right, it remains a challenge to be tackled. And Professor Kurlin, do share with us a bit about the efforts in the U.S. to tackle long COVID.
Yeah, I fully acknowledge the comments that Dr. Kwok made. It's a really challenging problem. As many as 15% of people who have gotten COVID are thought to have long COVID. But if you really go into detail and ask people very closely if they have any residual symptoms after COVID, as many as perhaps 70% will say they have one or more symptoms. It's a challenging problem medically because it's likely a heterogeneous set of conditions. We don't really even know why people have quote unquote long COVID. It may be that the immune system, well, there's several hypotheses. One is that there's continuing cellular or the residual cellular damage, direct cellular damage by the viral infection itself. Then there are some thoughts about autoimmune responses or ongoing inflammatory response, even though the virus is gone. And then finally, in some cases, maybe there's a small amount of viral material still present that's provoking an immune response. And as Dr. Kwok pointed out, the symptoms of long COVID can be really varied, from including neurologic symptoms, gastrointestinal symptoms, constitutional symptoms like fatigue and weakness, fever. And so it's very difficult because of the many different causes and many different effects to have one treatment. And then, of course, there are the large numbers. I think symptomatic therapy, well, on the bright side, although many people have long COVID, usually these symptoms resolve over a period of months in most people. And in the meantime, symptomatic treatment for the effects, the specific effects they're having, help. And then there are sort of ancillary services like support groups and information like that. In addition, there's some sort of new studies coming out that are trying to deal with some of the specific causes. One set of symptoms is thought to be due to dysfunction of the vagus nerve, which is an important physiologic response that governs a lot of autonomic systems like swallowing and heart rate. And you can imagine that if that nerve is doing poorly, you're going to have a lot of very severe symptoms. And there are a few studies showing that there are some physical maneuvers that can be done with augmented counterpulsation, basically inflatable cuffs on the arms and legs that can stimulate the vagus nerve and hopefully recover function. So these are some of the things that we're trying to do, but it really is a very challenging problem and a quite large one in terms of the number of people who are affected.
Right, because research is still evolving, of course. Right, Professor Kurlin, as always, thank you very much for your insights today. And Professor Kwok here in the studio, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ismar.
You're most welcome, Professor Kurlin. For our viewers here in the country, do remember that the cap on social gatherings stands at 10, while business hours for drinking and dining establishments have been extended to midnight for the next 2 weeks. Thank you for watching. See you on Tuesday.